Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. You ready to get into some more fascinating stuff?
Always.
So today, we're going to be tackling the work of Stephen Covey.
Oh, yeah.
You know him? He's the author of that super influential book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
One of the greats.
Definitely. And we're going to be focusing specifically on what Covey had to say about building and maintaining relationships.
Relationships. They're the bedrock of just about everything, aren't they?
Totally. And Covey was all about like those rock-solid connections, the kind that can really stand the test of time.
And what's amazing is how relevant his work still is today. Even though 7 Habits came out way back in the 80s.
It's like he had this crystal ball or something.
He really did.
Yeah.
He tapped into these timeless principles of human interaction.
So, for those who haven't had the chance to read 7 Habits yet.
Or maybe need a little refresher.
Exactly.
Oh.
Can you give us a quick overview of who Covey was and why his ideas resonate so strongly?
Well, Covey wasn't just some self-help guru. He was an educator, a businessman, a deep thinker.
Yeah. You can definitely feel that depth in his writing.
Oh, absolutely. And he was all about this idea of principle-centered leadership.
Principle-centered leadership. What does that even mean?
Okay, so it's not just about leading others. It's about leading yourself first.
Okay.
Like starting with your own character, your integrity, empathy, fairness.
So it's like being the change you want to see in the world?
Exactly. And from that solid ground, then you can effectively lead and influence others.
Okay, so how does this principle-centered leadership thing actually play out in the context of relationships?
Well, let's say you're in a sticky situation at work. Maybe a disagreement over a project or something.
Gotten there.
Right?
We all have.
A principle-centered leader wouldn't approach that with a my way or the highway attitude.
More like a let's find a solution that works for everyone kind of vibe.
Exactly. They tap into those principles, integrity, empathy, fairness, to find a solution that respects everyone's input.
Okay. So it's like leading by example, showing that you value other people's perspectives.
Precisely. And that brings us to one of Covey's most famous concepts.
Drum roll, please.
The idea of win-win solutions.
Win-win, I feel like that gets thrown around a lot, but I'm guessing Covey had a much deeper meaning in mind.
Oh, definitely. For Covey, win-win wasn't about compromise or settling for less. It was about finding creative solutions where both parties genuinely benefit.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Give me an example. How would Covey approach a situation where it seems like someone has to lose for the other person to win?
So let's picture a couple arguing over vacation plans.
Ooh, classic.
Right? One wants a relaxing beach getaway. The other's craving adventure in city life.
Sounds like a recipe for disaster.
A classic win-lose scenario.
Yeah.
But Covey would say instead of digging in their heels, this couple needs to tap into empathy and creativity.
Okay.
Maybe they discover a coastal city that offers both beaches and vibrant cultural experiences.
Best of both worlds.
Exactly. Or perhaps they agree to split their vacation, dedicating half to each person's preference.
I liked that.
The point is, it's not about one person getting their way. It's about finding that third alternative that truly satisfies both people's needs.
Mind blown. That's such a different way of looking at conflict.
It really is. And that shift in perspective requires another one of Covey's core principles.
Get me with it.
Trust. He believed that trust is the absolute foundation of any truly effective relationship.
Makes sense. If you don't trust the other person, you're always going to be second-guessing their motives.
Exactly. You're operating from a place of fear instead of a place of collaboration.
So how do we build that kind of trust Covey talks about?
Well, Covey believed that trust is built through integrity, by aligning your actions with your words and your values.
Walking the walk, not just talking the talk.
You got it. And it's about showing up authentically in all your interactions, which ties back to his belief in interdependence.
Interdependence? That sounds like a mouthful. What's that all about?
It's this idea that we can achieve so much more together than we ever could alone.
2 heads are better than 1.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that we all have different strengths and weaknesses, and that by working together, we can create something truly remarkable.
So we've got principle-centered leadership, win-win solutions, trust, and interdependence. What else is crucial to building these Covey-style, rock-solid relationships?
Well, remember that conflict we talked about earlier, that workplace disagreement? To truly resolve it, you need to understand where the other person is coming from.
Right. Put yourself in their shoes.
And that's where one of Covey's most famous quotes comes in. Seek first to understand, then to be understood.
Oh, yeah. That one's a classic. But to be honest, I sometimes feel like I'm hearing someone but not really listening, if you know what I mean.
I think we've all been there. But Covey was talking about a much deeper level of listening. Active listening.
Active listening. Okay, I'm all ears.
It's about putting aside your own thoughts and judgments and truly focusing on what the other person is saying, both verbally and non-verbally.
So it's not just about waiting for your turn to talk. It's about really engaging with what they're sharing.
Exactly. Like asking clarifying questions, reflecting back what you're hearing, making sure you truly grasp their perspective.
Okay, so it's about creating that space where the other person feels truly heard and understood.
Precisely. And that takes a good dose of empathy.
Empathy, putting ourselves in the other person's shoes.
Exactly. Trying to see the world through their eyes, even if we don't agree with their perspective.
This is all starting to feel pretty transformative. But I gotta ask, what about those situations where, despite our best efforts, there's just a fundamental clash of values or personalities?
That's a really great question, and something we'll definitely unpack further. But for now, let's transition to some other key beliefs that Covey had about building relationships.
Ooh, a cliffhanger. I'm hooked. What else did Covey have up his sleeve when it comes to creating those truly strong connections?
Well, he talked a lot about the importance of integrity and honesty,
Hmm.
aligning actions with words.
Right. Not just talking the talk, but walking the walk.
Exactly. He believed that living with integrity builds lasting trust and respect. And that leads us to another crucial aspect, making and keeping promises.
Oh, man. Promises. I think we've all been on both sides of that equation. Making promises we couldn't keep, or having someone break a promise that was important to us.
It can really shake the foundation of a relationship.
For sure. So what did Covey have to say about promises?
He was very clear that trust is earned through consistency. By setting realistic expectations and then following through on your commitments. It's about proving yourself reliable in the small things, day in and day out.
So it's not about making these grand gestures, but about showing up consistently in those everyday interactions. Like, if you tell your partner you'll pick up milk on the way home, you actually do it.
Exactly. It's those little things that add up over time and build that unshakable foundation of trust.
It's like building that trust muscle, one small promise at a time.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
And that muscle gets stronger with each commitment you keep. But it's not just about keeping your word on. Covey also emphasized the importance of something he called proactive communication.
Proactive communication. Okay, I'm intrigued. What's the difference between regular communication and this proactive kind?
Well, he meant addressing concerns early on and openly, rather than letting them fester and potentially explode later.
Oh, so it's like getting ahead of those issues before they become big problems.
Precisely. It's about creating a safe space where both people feel comfortable expressing their thoughts and feelings.
So the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Exactly. Even the stuff that's hard to talk about.
So instead of letting those frustrations or annoyances simmer until you blow up, you address them head on, but in a respectful and constructive way.
You nailed it. It's about having those sometimes difficult conversations before things spiral out of control. And it ties directly back to trust and empathy. When you trust the other person and you approach the conversation with empathy, even tough topics can be discussed in a way that strengthens the relationship.
Okay, this is all making a lot of sense. But I'm sure our listeners are eager to hear how to actually put these principles into practice. It's one thing to understand the concepts, but another to actually implement them in our lives.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thankfully, Covey didn't just talk about principles. He gave us practical tools and strategies for building those rock-solid relationships.
Oh, okay. So less theory, more action. I like it.
And that's what we'll be diving into next.
I can't wait. Let's roll up our sleeves and get into the nitty-gritty of how to actually make these principles work for us.
Let's do it.
All right, so we've talked about some of Covey's big ideas: principle-centered leadership, win-win solutions, the importance of trust and empathy. Now let's get down to brass tacks. How do we actually apply these principles in our everyday lives?
Right. It's one thing to talk the talk, but walking the walk, that's where the real magic happens.
Exactly. So let's start with that win-win mindset. It sounds great in theory, but how do we actually cultivate that approach when we're faced with, real-life conflicts and disagreements?
Well, I think it all starts with a conscious shift in perspective. Instead of going into a situation thinking, I need to win, you ask yourself, how can we both walk away from this feeling good?
So it's about recognizing that the other person has needs and desires just as valid as yours?
Precisely. And that requires a willingness to listen, to understand the other person's perspective, and to really brainstorm creative solutions that address everyone's concerns.
It's like that vacation planning example you gave earlier. Instead of each person just digging in their heels and demanding their own way, they take the time to truly understand each other's desires and find a solution that satisfies both of them.
Exactly. And that's where active listening and empathy come in. Remember Covey's famous quote, seek first to understand, than to be understood.
Oh, yeah, that one's a classic. But I'll be honest, sometimes it's hard to put that into practice. Our brains are just wired to like jump in with our own thoughts and opinions, especially when we feel strongly about
Oh,
something.
absolutely. It
Yeah.
takes practice, and it's not always easy, but it's so worth it. Active listening is about more than just hearing the words the other person is saying. It's about paying attention to their body language, their tone of voice, the emotions behind their words.
It's like becoming a detective, right? Looking for those subtle cues that tell us what the other person is really feeling and thinking.
Exactly. And it's about asking clarifying questions, reflecting back what you're hearing, showing genuine interest in what they have to say.
So it's about creating that space where the other person feels truly heard and understood.
Precisely. And when someone feels heard, they're much more likely to open up, to compromise, to work collaboratively towards a solution.
It's like building a bridge of understanding, right? And that bridge is built on a foundation of trust.
Absolutely. And trust, as we discussed earlier, is absolutely essential for any strong relationship. Covey believed that one of the most powerful ways to build trust is by making and keeping promises.
Okay. But let's be real. We've all been there, right? We make a promise with the best of intentions, but then life happens and we drop the ball.
Oh, I've been there more times than I care to admit. But
Yeah.
Covey had some wise advice for this. He said, start small. Don't overcommit, especially early on in a relationship. Focus on making small, manageable promises and then consistently following through.
So it's about proving yourself reliable in those everyday interactions. Like if you tell a friend you'll call them back, you actually make that call.
Exactly. It's about showing the other person that your word means something, that they can rely on you. And as you build that track record of reliability, you earn the right to make bigger promises.
It's like building that trust muscle, one small promise at a
You
time.
got it. And that muscle gets stronger with each commitment you keep. But it's not just about the big promises. It's about those little everyday interactions that build a foundation of trust and reliability.
I love that analogy. It really highlights the fact that trust is built over time through consistent effort.
Absolutely. And speaking of effort, another key principle Covey emphasized was proactive communication. We touched on this earlier, but I think it's worth diving a bit deeper.
Yes, please, because let's be honest, those difficult conversations can be, well, difficult.
There's no doubt about it. But Covey believed that those conversations, when handled with care and respect, can actually strengthen relationships. It's about addressing issues head-on before they have a chance to fester and grow into bigger problems.
So it's like preventative maintenance for your relationships,
I'd say
right? Catch those little cracks before they turn into major fissures.
exactly. And it starts with creating a safe space where both people feel comfortable expressing their thoughts and feelings, even when those feelings are negative or uncomfortable.
That makes sense.
Oh.
Because if you don't feel safe expressing your concerns, you're more likely to just bottle them up, which can lead to resentment and distance.
Precisely. Proactive communication is about being open and honest with each other, but doing so in a way that's respectful and constructive.
Okay, so how do we actually do that? How do we have those tough conversations without things spiraling out of control?
One of Covey's most helpful tips is to use I statements instead of you statements. So
Yeah.
instead of saying, you always do this or you never do that, which can feel accusatory and put the other person on the defensive, you focus on expressing your own feelings and needs.
So you might say something like, I feel hurt when you, or I need. It's a subtle shift in language, but I can see how it would make a big difference in how the message is received.
Exactly. It takes the focus off of blame and puts it on collaboration and understanding.
It's about saying, hey, this is how I'm feeling and this is what I need. Can we work together to find a solution?
You got it. And that's what proactive communication is all about. It's about working together to find solutions that strengthen the relationship rather than weaken it.
It's about seeing those difficult conversations as opportunities for growth and deeper connection rather than battles to be won or lost.
Precisely. And remember, proactive communication isn't just about addressing problems. It's also about expressing appreciation, gratitude, and affection.
Oh, that's so important. It's easy to take those positive feelings for granted, but expressing them out loud can make a huge difference in a relationship.
Absolutely. Those small gestures of kindness and appreciation go a long way in building strong, loving connections. It's like making deposits in the emotional bank account of the relationship.
I love that analogy. It's a great reminder that relationships require ongoing nurturing and attention.
Exactly. And speaking of nurturing, we can't forget about one of Covey's most important principles, sharpen the saw. He believed that personal growth is essential for building healthy relationships.
Right. It's about investing in our own mental, emotional, and physical well-being.
Exactly. It's about taking care of ourselves so that we can show up as our best selves for the people we care about.
It's like that saying, you can't pour from an empty cup. If we're depleted and running on fumes, it's hard to be present, supportive, and loving in our relationships.
You're absolutely right. And that's why Covey saw personal growth as an act of service to our relationships.
It's not selfish to take time for ourselves. It's actually an investment in the health and well-being of our connections with others.
Lastly, and personal growth doesn't have to be this big, time-consuming endeavor. It can be as simple as taking a few minutes each day to meditate, read a book, go for a walk, or do something that brings you joy and recharges your batteries.
So it's about making those small but consistent efforts to nourish ourselves so that we can nourish our relationships.
You said it perfectly.
Mm.
And that, my friend, is the essence of Covey's philosophy. It's about recognizing that our relationships are our most valuable assets, and that investing in them is an investment in our own happiness and fulfillment.
This has been so insightful. I feel like we've covered so much ground. But I'm also aware that we've only scratched the surface of Covey's work. There's so much more to explore.
You're absolutely right. Covey's teachings are incredibly rich and nuanced. But I think we've laid a solid foundation for understanding his core principles.
And now I'm really curious to see how all of this comes together in different types of relationships. Because let's face it, applying these principles to a romantic relationship might look different than applying them to a work relationship or a friendship.
That's a great point, and that's exactly what we'll be diving into next. We'll explore how Covey's teachings can help us navigate the unique challenges and opportunities that arise in various relationship dynamics.
I can't wait. I'm eager to see how these principles come to life in those real-world scenarios.
Me too. It's one thing to understand the concepts in the abstract, but it's quite another to see how they play out in the messy reality of our daily lives.
Well said. So let's take a moment to gather our thoughts, and then we'll dive into the fascinating world of relationships through the lens of Stephen Covey. Okay. So we've explored Covey's philosophy and all those practical tips for building stronger relationships.
It's a powerful framework, isn't it?
It really is. But now I'm curious to see how those principles actually play out in real-life situations. Because relationships can be messy.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
Real life rarely follows a neat little script.
exactly. So let's dive into some specific scenarios, starting with something we all encounter, conflict. It's inevitable in any relationship, but how we approach it can make all the difference.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
So using Covey's framework, how do we navigate those situations where disagreements arise?
Well, Covey would say, remember that win-win mindset we talked about?
Yeah.
It's so easy to get caught up in that, like, battle mentality, like, I need to win this argument.
But that can be so destructive to a
Then
relationship.
it's like, you might win the battle, but lose the war.
Exactly. So instead of digging in our heels, we need to tap into empathy, active listening, a genuine desire to understand the other person's perspective.
It all goes back to that Covey quote, seek first to understand, then to be understood.
That's the one. And remember, understanding doesn't necessarily mean agreement. We can validate the other person's feelings without necessarily agreeing with their viewpoint.
Oh, that's a good point. So it's more about saying, hey, I hear you, I understand where you're coming from, even if you don't see eye to eye on the issue itself.
Precisely. And once you've established that foundation of understanding, then you can start brainstorming solutions that address both people's needs.
Like that vacation planning example. Sometimes the win-win involves compromise, but other times it's about coming up with a creative solution that neither person had even considered.
Exactly. It's about expanding the possibilities instead of getting stuck in that either-or thinking.
But let's be real, sometimes emotions run high during conflict, and it can be tough to stay calm and rational. Any tips for those heated moments?
Oh, absolutely. First and foremost, recognize when you're getting triggered. If you feel your heart rate going up, your thoughts racing, take a step back.
Yeah, sometimes you just need to, walk away and cool down before things escalate.
Exactly. Covey talked about creating an emotional bank account in relationships. Every act of kindness, empathy, understanding is a deposit, but every hurtful action or word is a withdrawal.
So when we're emotionally flooded, we're more likely to make withdrawals and say things we regret.
Exactly.
Huh.
And that's why taking a pause can be so crucial. It's like hitting the reset button, giving yourself a chance to calm down and make sure you're not depleting that emotional bank account.
And of course, proactive communication is key. Addressing those issues early on can prevent those big blowouts from happening in the first place.
It's like taking care of a small leak before it turns into a major flood.
Makes sense. Okay, so we've talked about conflict. Let's shift gears a bit and talk about trust, because we've established it's the bedrock of any strong relationship, but trust can be fragile.
Especially in those close relationships where we're most vulnerable.
Exactly. So how do we rebuild trust once it's been broken?
Well, It's definitely not easy. And sometimes, depending on the severity of the breach, it might not be possible. But if both parties are committed to repairing the relationship, it can be done.
So where do you even begin?
It starts with taking full responsibility for your actions. If you've broken someone's trust, offer a sincere apology. Not just a quick, "I'm sorry," but a genuine acknowledgement of the pain you've caused.
Right, so it's about saying, I messed up and I understand how much this hurt you. But then how do you move beyond the apology?
It's about demonstrating through your actions that you're committed to changing your behavior,
Mm.
showing up consistently with integrity, honesty, and empathy.
It's like making those deposits back into that emotional bank account we talked about.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that rebuilding trust takes time. There's no quick fix.
Mm.
It's about consistently showing up as your best self, proving through your actions that you're worthy of the other person's trust.
Patience, persistence, and a willingness to put in the work.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
You know, this has been such an eye-opening deep dive into Covey's work. I feel like I've been given this toolbox filled with practical strategies for building stronger, more meaningful relationships.
Me too. It's like he's given us this roadmap for navigating the complex world of human connection.
And even though we've covered a lot of ground, I know we've only scratched the surface.
There's always more to learn and explore.
Absolutely. But I think we've laid a solid foundation for understanding Covey's core principles and how they can be applied to our own lives.
And ultimately, that's what it's all about, right? Taking these ideas and putting them into practice so that we can build stronger, more fulfilling relationships.
Couldn't agree more. Well, this has been another fascinating deep dive. I always learn so much from these conversations.
Likewise, it's a pleasure to share these insights with you and our listeners.
And to our listeners out there, thank you for joining us on this journey into the world of Stephen Covey. Remember, even the smallest steps can make a big difference in your relationships.
So go out there and build those rock-solid connections.
And until next time, keep diving deep